Hey, friends, Darren Bailey here with another show. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and thanks for all the encouragement that you send our way. And on these podcasts, you can always email me, Darren at baileyforillinois.com, if you have thoughts, ideas, suggestions. Maybe you've got questions with some of the guests that we have. And today we're going to be highlighting and spotlighting Clay County again. I've got a good friend with me, Dr. Bill Harrison. We're going to talk with him about basically what he's been doing since quote unquote retirement, which I've already had that conversation with him. And he's like me, retirement doesn't necessarily exist in his vocabulary. Many of you may know him as a doctor of chiropractor medicine here in Louisville. He grew up down the road in Clay City, married to his beautiful wife, Patty. And anyway, we're going to talk about what he has going on the mission field, much like Cindy and I enjoy this mission field of government. Bill and Patty have a mission field in Mexico. So, Bill, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Why don't you just catch people up just a little bit? I know you grew up in Clay City. Tell us a little bit about your journey till here, and then let's talk about what you've been doing since you've left your practice in Louisville.
Okay, I grew up in Clay City, as Darren said, and went to St. Louis to chiropractic college, graduated in 1972, and went to Missouri to practice, actually, outstate Missouri, about 90 miles west of St. Louis in the town of Montgomery City, Missouri. Practiced there from early 1973 through 81, and moved here back to Louisville, back home for me, in 1981, opened a practice here in November of 81, and practiced here for 26 years.
All right.
So at that time, it was retirement time. I was 57, and that's way too early for anybody to retire. So anyway, we headed to South Texas, and we actually headed to Panama first and thought we'd go to Panama and do some mission work down there, and that just didn't work out, so we moved back to South Texas, where my parents had spent winters, and the first few years it was winters there, and then in 2007 we sold our home here in Illinois and moved down there, and we just started going into Mexico, into Nuevo Progreso, Mexico, south of Weslaco, Texas. And it's a very safe crossing at this time even. And we started doing some mission work.
All right. Well, that's what I appreciate about you. I've pretty well known you for most of my adult life. 1981, Cindy and I were freshmen in high school, and you were always at the ball games and there to help out with any injuries, and I appreciate that. But let's start at ground zero, because a lot of people, they want to do something. They want to make a difference. What was it that obviously you were drawn to the area because family had been there before? How does that process start with someone when they want to make a difference in something and they just don't know where to start?
Well, for us, I was going down pretty regular, 2 or 3 days a week. I'd just end up going down there. I love the people of Mexico. I have since my parents moved there in 1976. And so for me, it was kind of a natural transition. I knew some Spanish. I've learned to speak fairly decent Spanish since then, just street talk. And so anyway, we were there one day, and the guy that was parking cars out in front of a spa that we were at, they do pedicures and manicures and hair and all that sort of stuff. And anyway, he was parking cars, and the soles of his shoes were flopping back and forth, and it was pouring down rain. So he had wet feet all day. And I told Patty, I said, we need to buy that gentleman some shoes. And so we went to, at that time, to not a flea market, but a place that we could buy used shoes, found out his size. And we took him a couple pair of shoes, and it just all kind of started from there. Our mission actually started as shoes for children. So anyway, in the process, she had a little stool that she'd go down and sit on, and it put her down at street level, and she could see the kids walk by, some without shoes, some with really bad shoes. And so we just decided to start buying shoes for kids. So she would put her foot down on a piece of paper, draw a line around her foot, and she normally would go buy shoes for that child.
Wow.
So that developed into about 50, 60, sometimes as many as 100 pair of shoes a month. And what we found out over time was, and it didn't take long, maybe a year, we were providing a black market for shoes in Nuevo Progreso, Mexico. What would happen is the children would go home and they'd have this pair of shoes on that mom knew she could sell and get some money, and she'd sell the shoes and go to the store and buy food. So then came the food ministry for us, and we still bought shoes and gave clothes to children and families and that sort of stuff, but we started feeding children. And when we first started, it was just we would go to a taco stand on the street, and I would just buy a bunch of tacos, and all the children that was there would eat with us. That got to where they'd come by and ask when we were going to dinner so they could come back. And it got to be funny because it was like a Pied Piper. When we'd walk down the street, here'd come all the kids. I mean, they'd just come to us, and because they knew they could get a meal. And it works in Mexico particularly well simply because they don't have enough schools for all the children to go all day, so everybody goes a half day. So a lot of the children would go from about 7:30 in the morning until 12:30 in the afternoon, and the afternoon school would start at 1, and then they'd go till 6. So not a lot of, no PE, no recess, no anything except for the youngest of the children. So they still got 5 hours of education, and it worked out. The strange thing about that to me was at noon, 12:30, the teachers, the administration, and everybody took all of their papers and everything out of the desk, and in come a new administration, and that's still the way it works.
Wow.
So it's quite a process, quite a
Wow.
process.
Well, what I love about your story is that for all practical purposes, I assume maybe you went to South Texas and Mexico maybe to just enjoy life and slow down a little bit, but you had your eyes open, you had your heart open to God, and you saw a need. And I totally, until we were talking a few days ago, I completely forgot about your shoes ministry because I know you kind of kept that local. You were doing that on your own.
Right.
And then that turned into this food ministry, and
Right.
and tell us now tell us a little bit about, because I know the food ministry grew into quite an ordeal. Tell us about that.
Yes, about 8 years ago, we decided that we were going to these taco stands on the street, and they'd have chairs and tables and stuff set out, and we'd basically just take over the whole thing. And we were paying for the meals and stuff, but I just felt like we were pushing other people away from those taquerias, and those people need the income. Not that we weren't paying, but I felt like maybe it was affecting their business before and after, we were there. And so I bought Patty and I went and looked, and we found a little cargo trailer and took it to a company there in South Texas and had it painted bright orange and some balloon and monkey graphics and stuff on the side of it to attract the children. And it was one that had the whole back end just opened down, and it made like a ramp where they could walk up to the feeding line there. And we thought, well, we'll feed maybe 50 children a day or something like that. Well, sure enough, we did. In about 3 months, we was feeding 75 to 100 a day. And then we actually got told that we had to leave the area that we were. We were back one block off of Main Street, and they told us that we needed to get off their parking lot after they had told us we could have it and be there. And so I looked at that like a sign that, hey, you need to grow. This is really going crazy, and there's not enough room, and it's hot in the trailer, and we just need something. So we found a doctor in town that I had breakfast with occasionally of a morning, and he said, well, I've got the back lot behind my office. He was down a block and on Main Street, but the back lot, which was on one street off of Main, was still very accessible to the children, and actually maybe more accessible than where we were previously. So we moved the trailer down there and then started making arrangements to get building material into Mexico, and because you can't buy quality building material that I was used to working with. I grew up in a construction business, and so we got it all moved in, and in about 5 days built a kitchen that was 12 feet wide and 16 feet long, and put air conditioning stuff in it, 2 serving windows, and hired more cooks to serve the food and to cook the food and get it ready. So we started serving food from 11 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and that caught the kids that went to school in the afternoon, that caught them before school. Kids that went to school of a morning caught them after school. So everybody had time to get there and eat. And it continued growing, and when COVID hit and the Minister of Health asked us to close down, we was feeding about 1,200 meals a week.
Wow.
5 days a week, Monday through Friday. We didn't
Wow.
feed Saturday and Sunday. They had to fend for themselves there. So that's kind of how that happened.
Wow. Well, I want to make, so we're hearing what this is all growing into. You're a couple hundred shoes a month, 1,200 feeding 1,200 children a month, and people.
No, a week.
A week. Thank you. And we hear these stories. A lot of people have these grand ideas of something they want to do locally or elsewhere, and they go about trying to figure out how they accomplish, the end goal immediately. And I think it's very important to remember it all starts with one. You saw a need of one person with a shoe that needed shoes. You saw a need with one hungry child, and I think that's an important lesson for us today in life. If we just take care of the one instance that's before us, and if God allows, and then He grows that. And I think that is so amazing, because it can't be easy. I remember early on, 8 years ago, however long that's been, you were getting things into Mexico by the grace of God that weren't necessarily maybe expedited, that shouldn't have been so easy. And I remember you telling stories, and I think that is amazing.
Yes.
So, okay. So you started with the shoe ministry. That turned into a food ministry.
Right.
And then recently, you've told me, what is that now turned into?
COVID closed us down. When COVID hit, the Minister of Health came to us and said, look, you've got 200 children here almost at once, because there's a 30-minute overlap there with the children from morning school and afternoon school. And there was times we would have maybe 100, 150, 200 children there all at once. And we just basically had a couple or 3 tables that I had built under a tent, because that thing expanded. We had the 8x6 or the 12x16 building there, and that wasn't big enough, so we built a 12x12 on the back room as a back room to that, just for storage of food, and had a big commercial freezer and cooler in there, another big air conditioner because of all the heat we were creating in that small building. We also built another no, it was 12 by 16 building, and set it across from the first one. And it was used for food storage, can storage, had another freezer in it, stuff like that. Then we roofed between the two of them, and we did this Mexico style. We roofed between the two of them and used that for seating so that the children could get in either out of the heat or the rain. And then we had a fella from Missouri came along and said, hey, we always had a lot of winter Texans that wanted to come visit. And so once a year we would have a meal for them to come and eat with the children. And they'd do that. And we had a guy come to us, said, hey, I've got a big tent, a 20 by 20 that you're welcome to. And you could set it up right here at the end of this, and you could put more tables. So we did that, and we found a school in Texas that had replaced some of their tables that had the seating that kind of pulled out from them and let down. And so we put that. So we finally got to where we could seat about 75. Excuse me. And that's kind of how it just grew. Well, then COVID closed us down, and we were just kind of in a quandary there what to do. I was still practicing as a chiropractor over there, and most of my money over there just stays there. And had a young lady that brought a little boy by, and he had a cleft palate, and they have no health care, no insurance, no anything, no money. Want to know if we could help him get that taken care of. And he was 6 days old. And I remember very distinctly, he was already dehydrated to the point that I did not think he would live till morning. And I took him to a good doctor friend of mine there. And I said, hey, Omar, is there anything that we can do for this child to keep him alive until I can get a milk pump for the mom and some way to get nutrition into this child? We decided the best thing to do was to inject fluid under his skin that he could absorb and see if that wouldn't work. And she brought him by. We did that, about a half a liter. We did that, and the next day she brought him by, and he looked like a different child. I mean, his skin was no longer hard like cardboard, and he had some electrolytes in him and stuff that was in the fluid. And so we got her a pump. We taught her how to use a straw to put down in the milk, and put her thumb over the end of it and stick it down his throat and give him milk, because we didn't want him getting milk pneumonia. And she was able to do that. And then I got in touch with you, because I remembered you had a granddaughter that didn't have a suck reflex when she was born, and you had gotten some special nipples, I think, out of Japan for her, and those were sent to us to give to her, and then we ordered some and to give to her, and it was a nipple that has a ball on the butt end of it that you chew on, and it lets milk down into the nipple, and then the next time you chew on it, it pushes it out. And it was a long nipple so that it put it down the throat far enough that the children wouldn't choke.
I completely forgot about that.
Milk
Yeah.
pneumonia. And so anyway, that kind of led us into what we're doing presently. But in the meantime, I kept asking the Department of Health if we could reopen, and no, we can't do that. And I think it was not as much COVID at that time, because there was very little COVID in Mexico all of the time. There was hardly any COVID broke out, a few, but mostly elderly that were homebound and sick anyway. And they kept telling us no. Well, about 8 months in, one of the churches came to us and said that one of our cooks went to and said, we'd like to open the kitchen again. And I said, well, they tell us we can't. And said, I remember her words distinctly. She said, in Mexico, we have real separation of church and state. The government can't tell the churches what to do, unlike in America, she said. And I said, really? We're supposed to have separation of church and state, but we don't, because they was telling us you can't have church, you can't do
Church
this,
won't stand up. So, yeah.
Church won't stand up. So anyway, I said, well, that sounds great to me. They said, but we don't have the equipment or the buildings to do it. And I said, well, we have the equipment and buildings, and you're welcome to them. You can just have them if you'll open the food ministry. Oh, they was just excited, and they was going to do that. And about 5 days later, they came back and said, well, both church boards have looked at the books, your books, that I had at the kitchen, and they say they can't afford to do this. And I said, well, if I'm not paying the help, which saves me $1,000, a little over $1,000, almost $1,200 a month, that means it's $14,000, $15,000 cheaper for me to just pay for the food, and you all take care of the help from the churches, and that'll work. And so that happened. We gave them the buildings and everything, and they was running right along, and they was paying for the food. Patty and I was paying for the food. We had people that would help us. I'd have people that walk down the street, and they knew what we was doing, and there'd be guys walk up to me and to shake my hand and say, hey, Doc, use this on the children. And when they'd shake my hand, there'd be a $100 bill or a $50 bill or something in their hand. So we had help. And they knew we was still helping. So that kind of changed into what we originally wanted to start with, was the churches helping with it. And that went on for about 2 or 3 months. And one Sunday, one of the people that had been in charge of the cartel prior to his starting to go to church, and another cartel took over the town and stuff. And so one Sunday he stood up and he said, you know, you all are talking about we're doing this and we're doing that, feeding these children, and we're not doing anything. The gringo's doing it. He's the one paying the bill. And he knew my name, but he used the term gringo, and I thought that was probably a little bit of the problem with the Minister of Health not wanting us to get started back, because it was a gringo doing it. It wasn't a Mexicano doing it. So he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just give $1,000 a month, and we'll start taking that program over. That's not enough to do it, but if some of the rest of you will step up, we will be feeding the children. Well, in about 3 weeks to a month, one of the business people that went there, fairly successful business people, stepped up and said, I'm going to match his $1,000 a month, and I'd like to challenge the rest of you to, I know you can't all give $1,000 a month, but you can give $500 or $300 or $200 or $100 or something, $20, it doesn't matter. Well, in about another month, they had taken over the whole thing, which was fine with us. And that freed up money for us to do more medical stuff with children.
Wow. Well, that's amazing what that's, and there's so much that you didn't elaborate on. I know you're dealing with children now with hearing problems, and I mean, it's amazing what's going on down there. Talk a little bit about Mexico, because it can't be, so we have the border issue right there where you're at. It can't be easy. And you mentioned the drug cartels. Just to finish up talking a little bit about, the adversity of the location and the problem with the border issue and the drug cartel. Where's all that fit in at?
Probably Nuevo Progreso is one of, if not the safest place to cross into Mexico. And believe it or not, that is because of the drug cartels. They want the American people to be able to cross into that area. It's the Gulf cartel that's in charge, and they get lots of money from that. And the way they get that money is in our town of 20,000 people, there's probably 150 to 200 pharmacies. And a lot of the people go down there, they can actually buy their medication cheaper than their copay here in the United States. Some medications that might cost, if your insurance wouldn't pay for it, that might cost $1,800 in the United States, you can buy for less than $100 down there.
Wow.
Same medication, same company, just a lack of greed.
Wow.
And that's what it's all about. It's greed.
Thank you.
In this country by the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, we have helped develop 2 spas that does nails and hair and massages and all of that stuff, skin tag removal, the whole 9 yards. And we've helped develop 5 pharmacies. The spas don't have to pay the cartel, but the pharmacies pay $500 per pharmacy per month to the cartel for what they call protection. It's not protection for the pharmacy, it's protection for the Winter Texans that cross. And they basically provide that protection as well as most of the order in the whole country. So it's a different situation. I remember a few years ago, Nuevo Progreso is now no longer an entry point for illegals to come into the United States. Won't let them on the bridge at all. That's controlled by the Mexico side. They're the ones that decided that it was not going to be an entry point. However, the Americans asked them to do that because they don't have the staff at this small bridge. But I remember the last thing that happened there was 100 plus Cuban refugees on that bridge. And whether they deserve to go walk into the United States or whether they didn't is not an issue. But the situation is they camped on the walkway that the Winter Texans and stuff was using for months. They would go down and bathe in the river of a night, some through the day, and there was a restroom at the entry of the thing, and they just basically overflowed it, and there was just sewage running into the river there and everything else. They just couldn't keep it. It wasn't built for 100 people to be living there. And so it got to be a real problem, and they all disappeared one night. They brought a bunch of vans in and loaded them up and took them to other points of entry and immediately changed that to a non-entry point.
On the Mexican side.
On the Mexican side.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, you can enter as a United States citizen or Canadian citizen with the proper identification and stuff. But if you're seeking political asylum or just wanting to cross and you don't have the proper paperwork, it can't happen.
Wow.
Not
Okay.
gonna happen.
Okay.
And they have people at the actual border, which is the center of the bridge there, to just visually see that you have paperwork. Now, you may get to the other side where the real check is, and they may not accept that paperwork and send you back, but most of it happens right at the center of the bridge.
Okay. So you've got the bridge, you've got this entry point.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the wall. I'm assuming the wall is all up and they can't cross. They can't come in illegally there. Tell us about that.
That's a wrong assumption.
Okay.
What happened when President Trump was building the wall was they had numerous construction crews working in a section here and a section over here and a section over here of that wall, and they would meet and put the final piece up. And that was fine until things changed in Washington, and they stopped the production of the wall. And there are places that there are thousands of probably 20-foot sections, 20-foot wide sections of that wall. Steel's already built. It's already there. It's laying in those places. And I suppose if we don't get an administration that decides we're going to have a wall, it'll lay there for eternity. And I suppose our government is leasing those places for that to just lay there. So what happened when everything come to a halt? You've got a wall over here that runs for maybe a mile or two that's all connected, and then you may have anywhere from, I know, one or two places that are only 40 or 50 feet in there that's not connected. If you close that, then maybe you might have 4 mile of wall because there might be a couple over here, but here's a hole in the middle of it. They just never did get to the point to where it all come together. And there's numerous ones of those all along our section, which is called the Rio Grande Valley section. I drive 25, 30 mile of it about every day on what's called the military highway. And they just, there's just all kinds of those areas. It's not, maybe the excavation's done. Most all of it has the big berm up, the concrete's poured, the concrete base, and then they would stand these panels and then pour more concrete in that, all rebarred and everything. I mean, there's no way through that thing without coming over the top of it with a rope ladder or something like that. That takes time. They've got sensors on both sides of the wall because the wall isn't really at the line. The wall in a lot of places is as much as maybe a half mile from the river. The river's the line. And that's a different issue too. But anyway, we can have sensors on the other side, and we know they're there and trying to get across. And by the time they're trying to get across, we've got cars there and people that can keep them on the other side. But if they're smart, they start looking for the end of the wall and one of those crossings, and they just come running across. And once they're across that wall right now, they've stepped a foot in America, and
they're here before they have to cross the wall, essentially. Yeah. Wow.
They're here.
Wow.
Yeah. State of Texas has U-boats running that. I call them U-boats. They're not really U-boats, military, but they look like military boats. Some of them are airboats. Some of them have regular outboard motors on them, big, maybe 5 or 6 big old motors. Look like they'll probably run 50, 60, 70 mile an hour to get to where they want to go. And got a 50 caliber machine gun mounted right on the front of them.
Okay.
And, it's not that I know that they've ever used those, but it's pretty damn intimidating.
I bet it is.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for coming in here today and sharing that. And there's a lot to take away here, and I want to encourage our viewers to just the power of one. If you've got that family down the street from you right now, you don't have to go to Mexico. We've got the need right here. If you see that need with the waiter or the waitresses at a restaurant or wherever it is, just step up, make it be the difference. And it doesn't even have to entail money. It can be a kind word or just some physical help. Make that difference. And Bill, that's, I guess, another thing I just want to point out, growing up here in Louisville, or whether it was on our school board, whether it was in our church board, you and I haven't always got along. We've butted heads in time. And I'm going to tell you something. That's what I admire about you so much, because in time we come back together. We realize we've got to work together, and you have had a lot to do. Just my interaction with you in life, with preparing me, to go and to serve in government. And as a matter of fact, it's been right at 6 years ago now when I made that announcement to run for state representative, and you were one of the first people that came and offered support and brought, introduced me to new friends that are still a major part of Cindy and I's life. And I want to thank you for that. I thank you for wherever you've seen the difference, wherever you've seen the need, you've stepped up. The days of high school sports, you were there. Somebody had a injury on the floor. You were out there. You were making the difference. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I've seen lots of needs that I couldn't meet. In Mexico, the dogs on the street are poorer than old Job's turkey. I mean, you can count every rib, and they're mangy, and they just look terrible. And I've had people just really get on me about, well, why don't you feed the animals? And my pat answer to that, and I'm pretty tough to get along with sometimes. I'm pretty damn opinionated, and my pat answer to that was, why don't you start a animal ministry? And all you got to do is bring some buckets over that you can fill with water, and any of these business people be glad to fill them for you or let you fill them there, and bring 50-pound bags of feed across. Well, I can't do that. Well, I guess I couldn't feed 1,200 kids to start with. I started with one, and I ticked one lady off enough. She started it. She didn't keep it up, but she started it. So, they come to learn that, boy, this is hard. This is work. I could have chose to have, and you and I talked the other day, our first impression was we were going to Panama and do a little bit of work around the Christian school there in Boquete, and live on the Caribbean side at Bocas del Toro. And when we went down there, when I left St. Louis 16 years ago on the airplane, I was talking with the realtor, and yes, it's still available. We had found a 13-acre island that had fresh water on it from a spring because of a huge mountain on land that was less than 5 miles away, pushing fresh water up on that island. And that's what we were going to do. That was my idea. When we got to Panama, it had sold. And that just kicked the chair out from under me. And I wasn't even wanting to look at any more property. And, I'm, like I say, pretty opinionated and pretty hard to get along with sometimes. And I just said, well, to heck with it. We'll just go home. So we flew back we had flown out of McAllen, Texas. We flew back to McAllen, and I said, let's just look around here for a while and see if we can find some place we just want to live here. So that's how we ended up there. It wasn't my plan. It was God's plan. We didn't need to be in Panama. We needed to be in Progreso, Mexico. That's where the children were that I became acquainted with in 1976, and they were now adults, and knew several of them because when my parents was down there, every year we would go down and visit for a couple weeks, and about every day I was in Mexico. It wasn't necessarily a visit with my parents, it was a visit with the people in Mexico. So the good Lord he'll show you the way. It may not be your way, but he'll show you the way,
That's exactly right. Well, I know of no better way to end Friends, I hope that you've been encouraged by this conversation to know that you can make a difference. And as Dr. Bill said, maybe just a bucket of water is all you need. So the needs are out there. The question is, are you making yourself available to whatever that need is? So thank you so much for tuning in. And again, you got comments, questions, ideas, send them, email them to me, Darren at baileyforillinois.com, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing these messages.